Welcome to the very first Inside Interpreting live interview from Integrity Languages. I'm your host, Dr. Jonathan Downey, and this is a very special interview for several reasons. But first, before I introduce the guests, I would like to get an idea of where everyone is from. So, wherever you're from, can you type in the country that you're watching this from in the chat box, just to get a bit of interaction going? I believe there is a 100 millisecond delay on my voice, so it's okay. It's a tiny little delay. People are saying hi, they can hear us. Yeah, someone is from England, someone is from Ireland, London. Good, we have a nice UK audience. So, as always with YouTube, feel free to use the chat box below the video at any time. And if you have enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to the Inside Interpreting channel. And if you would like to support the channel financially, above our heads right now, you should see a link. If you type that link, it's right above your head. If you type that link, you can find ways to financially sponsor the channel. It would be most appreciated, especially with the fun that we have had this afternoon making the technology work. We have people from Ireland, from Essex. Oh, Essex is a country now. Great. And apparently someone says that Jules' hair looks great. That's a compliment already. So, as I almost just introduced her there, I'm very glad to welcome Jules Dickinson to this virtual studio. Jules is an experienced community interpreter and qualified professional supervisor. She is passionate about supporting interpreters to be healthy and resilient practitioners. Jules' PhD, which I have read some of, I have to say, examined ways in which the interpreter impacts upon workplace interaction, focusing on humour and small talk in meetings. Aside from being a professional supervisor, she continues to support the development of the interpreting profession as a trainer, researcher, practitioner, and consultant. And apparently Julie, according to Sarah Glendenning, Julie is also a known fashion expert as well. We might get to that later. Now,
no end to my talents.
In a very first for this channel, this entire interview and the questions will be interpreted. So I have had to slow down from my normal fast Glaswegian. And it will be interpreted by Elvia Roberts, who's a registered sign language interpreter, and she'll be interpreting between English and British Sign Language. And just to let you know, shortly after this feed finishes, I don't know exactly when, YouTube is a mystery, the video itself will still be able to watch. And within roughly a week of the video finishing, I will have a subtitled version on the channel as well. It just takes me a while because for some strange reason the YouTube subtitling algorithm isn't very good with my accent. To tell you a funny story, at the end of every video I say this is Jonathan Downey from Inside Interpreting, and for the first few videos YouTube said this is Jonathan Downey from Insane Insurrection. So this is why you have to really check what YouTube says on the subtitles. The format of today is very simple. In just a moment I will be inviting Jules to give a short talk on professional supervision. And at the end of the talk, I'll be posing her your questions. I have some here already. Feel free at any point to put questions in the chat box because Jules isn't watching them. I am. And we'll give them over to Jules at the end of her talk. As I said, if you have any questions at any time, drop them in the chat box. I will see them and take a note of them. But for now, over to you, Jules.
Thanks, Jonathan. All the stresses about not having seen a hairdresser for a year or so have been completely wiped from my mind by the challenges of technology. But anyway, we're all sorted and we're ready to start. So thank you for inviting me to speak about supervision in this session today. I do really welcome the opportunity. I believe supervision is a vital component in ensuring interpreters and other communication professionals can sustain both health and longevity in their chosen career. It's something I'm really passionate about as both a supervisor and a supervisee, and hopefully I can communicate that passion to everybody today. So in the next 10 to 15 minutes, I'm going to look briefly at my personal journey from being a supervisee to a supervisor. That's been over the last 16 years or so. And then I'll look briefly at the development of supervision within the sign language interpreting profession. I'm going to highlight what for me are the main functions of supervision and what supervision is not. And then I'll talk about what supervision provides and why I think as interpreters we need that. And I'll conclude with a few tips about what you might need to think about when you're looking for a supervisor, and then it's over to questions. I have some notes, so I will keep dropping my eye gaze, and I'm also trying to multitask and keep an eye on Elvira in case she lets me know I'm going too fast, but hopefully it'll go smoothly. So I started engaging in the supervisory process about 16 years ago. I saw Claire Shard, who at that time was an interpreter in the mental health services. She was presenting about supervision at an ASLI conference, Association of Sign Language Interpreters conference, and this is way back in 2004. That was a pivotal moment in my career. I feel like I want to go back to Manchester and hammer up a plaque that says my life changed here. But basically, I came away from that conference thinking, I want some of that. And I was lucky enough that some interpreters in my area in the East Midlands also felt the same. So after some discussion and sourcing a suitable facilitator, we found a psychotherapist who agreed to take the four of us on board, bless her. We started out on group supervision, and all four of us are still in the same supervision group and still in supervision 16 years later. And I consistently describe supervision as the most important step I've taken in terms of my professional development. I love it so much that in 2015 I trained as a supervisor and qualified with a diploma in 2016. So that's my journey. If we look at what supervision is, there are various descriptions out there. The main point to stress is that it's a formal process of professional support. It provides a safe and confidential space for practitioners to grow, to develop their knowledge, and to hone their competence. It offers you the opportunity to talk about issues, challenges, dilemmas that can all arise in the course of your work. We're in a people-facing profession, so it gives you an outlet for all that emotional baggage you end up acquiring through the day, through the week, or through the month of your work. Supervision holds you accountable for your practice, so you're having to explain your decision-making and actions to another person, and that requires you in turn to think about your ethical underpinnings of your work. Supervision isn't a quick fix, it's a long-term process. So as a supervisee, you are asked to give an ongoing, regular commitment to think about and reflect on your work, and then be prepared to bring these reflections to supervision. So it deepens the understanding we have of our work, and that enhances our practice. So that's a payoff for us, but it's also a payoff for the people we work with. In terms of what it's not, supervision is not therapy, it's not counselling. If those sort of issues arise within a session, A, your supervisor should be able to identify them, and B, they should be able to signpost you to an appropriate service. So supervision is empowering, it's not instructional. And by that I mean if you're looking for answers, a supervisor will help you find them, and you usually have those answers. It's the supervisor's role to tease them out. So they won't be saying, oh, well, if I was you, I think you should have done such and such. To my knowledge, there isn't a couch to lie on. I don't have one anyway. And you don't have to disclose your deepest, darkest fears. I think there's a lot of uncertainty and maybe mistrust about what you have to disclose. Trust is a really crucial part of supervision. So you'll only talk about what you feel comfortable talking about. And that process will change over time as you develop a relationship with your supervisor. You realize they're not looking to judge you, they won't be shaming you, you won't be looking silly or stupid, which is a common fear. Supervision isn't line management, it's not peer supervision unless it's facilitated by a qualified supervisor. It isn't mentoring and it isn't coaching, although sometimes those elements, those skills will be used within the supervision sessions. So there are three main functions of supervision. Well, there are many, but these are the three main ones. We talk about the formative element, so the development of skills, of attitudes, and your abilities really through reflective practice. The normative element is that accountability that I've already referenced, the quality control element. It allows you to look at your work and monitor the decisions you make, how you're abiding to your code of conduct. The third element is the restorative function of supervision. And this is what we've already referred to, how you respond emotionally to the stresses of your work. And it's essential. So it stops you becoming over full. And quite often we don't know how full we are until we let some of those emotions out. So it can prevent us from becoming too thick-skinned, to being too thin-skinned, and that stops us being burnt out. Most supervision sessions will be a combination of all of those elements. In some sessions, it might be more restorative. In other sessions, if you brought a dilemma, it might be more of the normative function of supervision. So, in terms of supervision and sign language interpreting, I feel like it's been talked about forever. Like I say, my initial contact was in 2004, but it still feels like there's a lack of take up and a misunderstanding of what it is and how it can benefit practitioners. So, for a lot of the professionals we work alongside, and if we think about social workers, some healthcare professionals, counsellors, mental health workers, um, they have supervision, often mandatory. As interpreters, we experience the same stresses. We might be exposed to the same traumas as those professionals, but we don't have a support system underpinning our work. Looking at the impact of vicarious trauma, that's documented way back in 2003 by Michael Harvey. Ali Hetherington set up the 360 supervision diploma. She's been talking about supervision since 2011, talking about the causes and management of occupational stress. And then in 2012, she outlined the case for supervision in the interpreting field. Vicarious trauma is still being highlighted. 2015, Jamie MacDonald looks at vicarious trauma for interpreters. Here we are in 2020. I think only a small number of interpreters are accessing professional supervision. I'm hoping that will begin to change as people see the benefit and they understand it's not something to be scared of, but it's something to be, I think it's something to be relished and enjoyed, something that you look forward to. I've touched briefly on why we need it. I always say that interpreting is a people skill with some language stuff attached to it. The work we do is often not clear in terms of boundaries. Lots of people don't understand our role. I think on street leverage, we were referred to as first responders who cannot respond. So we witness many distressing things, but we're often we have limited power to act. And that can be quite damaging, I think. We regularly work with people in distress, but it's not what we think of as the big and obvious things that impact us often. So we know that interpreting a rape statement will be distressing and upsetting. We know that if we've interpreted a terminal diagnosis for a deaf person, that is going to impact us. but it's the everyday witnessing for me that I think we don't acknowledge the impact of. So seeing deaf people dismissed, belittled, bullied, ignored, devalued, discriminated against, that is an everyday occurrence for many of us. For ourselves, the way we're treated by deaf people, by hearing people, by agencies, by other professionals, often commodified, objectified, not valued. I'm just thinking about some of the things that I hear every week. Oh, are you the hand waver? You're very expensive, aren't you? Why do you need a break? A co-worker? Prep? It all takes its toll. Most of the issues I've taken to supervision over the years are related to those subtle drip, drip, insidious messages that we hear and the oppression we witness. We rarely have time outside of supervision to even acknowledge it happens, let alone how we manage it. So supervision gives you a set aside time for you to value yourself and have the space to consider all of this, be aware of how it affects you. I know that for many of us, we go from job to job, finish one, go to the next one. There's no time to stop and think, no time to reflect. So your supervisor can do that. They can press that pause button in your working life, help you to tease all the little elements that bring together a situation. Why did you go home and burst into tears? Why are you saying you feel quite hardened to that person or intolerant of them? What pushed your buttons? What caught you? And supervision is also really helpful in helping us understand what goes on in difficult relationships. And sometimes those difficult relationships can be with our co-workers. If you think about the situation where you arrive at a job and you don't know your co-worker, supervisor can help you look at some of the issues that come up with your co-worker. Last but by no means least, in fact, I should have put this at the top, affirmation. Supervision gives you the chance to look at what you did well. All too often, the focus is on the negative. Supervision can even that out. And your supervisor will help you recognize what went well, draw your focus to the skills you have, and they'll make sure you really hear it, that it lands somewhere, that you believe it. And that is the hardest work quite often. I know it's hard for me, and I recognize it's difficult for supervisees, but once you start that process and value yourself and recognize what you have, then you start to build your confidence. So that really just leaves me to give you a few hints about what you might want to look at when you're thinking about getting a supervisor. First of all, give some thought to whether you want somebody from within the profession. So do you want a sign language interpreter who's also a supervisor, or somebody external? Both have negatives and positives. For somebody, first off, if you're having somebody from within the profession, we're working with a small community. That is a complication. Your supervisor might know the deaf person you're talking about, where they work, your co-worker. They might know you. It's not insurmountable. It has to be acknowledged, aired, and talked about within the supervisory relationship. So when you first meet your supervisor, that's the sort of thing they would talk about with you. How will you manage those things if you both rock up at the same job? How will you maintain your boundaries? Ideally, you won't know your supervisor really well or work with them on a regular basis. That can narrow your field of choice. However, remote platforms such as Skype and Zoom can address that. In terms of positives, they will have shared lived experience, professional experience. They'll get it. They'll know where you're coming from. Obviously, an external, somebody from separate from the profession, won't know that, but they'll build up that picture over time. And actually, it can be a positive because you have to make things more explicit so they understand it. And when you articulate it, that's when you start to hear what you said and think, why do I do it like that? No, I've always done it like that. But now I'm having to explain to somebody else who knows nothing about my profession. Maybe that's not the best way to do it. Look for somebody who's qualified. So I'd recommend a minimum of 120 hours study on whatever course they've done. They should have had observations of their skills practice. In my view, if you're working with an unqualified supervisor, you're not in supervision. You're having a conversation with an experienced colleague. Has value, but it's not supervision. So there's always the risk of collusion, that somebody will say, oh, I think you did okay, because they don't want to challenge you and risk falling out with you. Supervisors will challenge you, but in a supportive way. So that's the difference, I think, for me. It's key to ask them if they're in supervision for the supervisory practice. I'd be very wary of any supervisor who isn't in supervision, a bit like counsellors have counselling. It's the same process. And ask for a free mini session, a try before you buy. Most supervisors will offer this. It gives you both an idea to see if you're a good fit, and if your supervisor offers what you're looking for, they might not be able to. So in conclusion, supervision is a way of keeping you healthy and accountable in a really challenging profession where there's little support available. It gives you a safety net, that sense of being accountable for your actions. And I think that's important when a large majority of us work freelance. It's an outlet for all those emotions and feelings. Somebody can help you siphon some of them off, release the pressure valve. And your supervisor can offer you a sounding board, hold up a mirror to your practice, fresh set of eyes. And quite often we can be blinkered, so your supervisor will help you peel those blinkers back and cover your blind spots. And at the end of the day, supervision, investing in supervision, means you're investing in yourself and valuing yourself. And I think that's what we all need to do. And that's my take on supervision. Happy to take any questions.
That was really good. And Jules and I had worked together on a project before, and some of that I hadn't heard, so I was really pleased to hear all that. That was really interesting. Got me stirred up. I think it's only fair that I start with the questions that were sent to us before this session even began. And we have a question here from Sarah Glendenning, who asks, is there a difference between supervision, mentoring, and coaching?
I always hate this question. For me, the differences are supervision is a long-term, ongoing process. So, as I've said, I've been in it for 16 years. I can't imagine stopping it. My personal experience of mentoring and coaching is that they're shorter term, more task focused, and probably more about those normative functions I talked about, so the development of skills and abilities. But then, as all supervisors work slightly differently, it may be that mentors and coaches may work differently. So I'm just talking about my experience. Supervisors are trained in the process rather than the task. So they will be they'll bring in lots of different tools, such as looking at the drama triangle, transactional analysis. So they'll work deeper, I think. And I'm not sure if mentors have supervision for their mentoring practice. I'm not sure about that. So that would be my answer, and that's the difference for me.
That's a classic academic terminology question that everyone loves getting terminology questions. So we have a question here from Karen Wolfenden who says, traditionally supervisors like counsellors have been trained to hold the physical space in the room. Now we're all online. What are you seeing as the differences and the positives that might lead on to think about socially distant supervision and what supervision is like in a COVID-19 world?
I think those of us who are sign language interpreters and supervisors are perhaps a bit ahead of the game because of the geographical spread of interpreters. We've had to start using online platforms quite early on. again, has its positives and negatives. I like to mix. I always like to try and get some face-to-face in, even if that means I go to Scotland or have a day in London where I meet all of my supervisors individually, because it's contact. There's a different relationship face-to-face, and you can do different things in terms of creative supervision. However, I think holding the space, holding the relationship is dependent on the relationship you already have with your supervisee. So it helps if you had some sort of face-to-face contact before you move online. But then I've worked with supervisees I've never met in real life, and we've had an instant connection and it's worked well. So yeah, I think holding the space online is all about the skills of your supervisor and the relationship they have with their supervisees.
It's a really interesting question. I've been amazed myself how much the way that you do business changes when you're not in a room, and everything is just changing. Sarah Glendenning is just saying that she's having to use group supervision online and she much prefers face to face. I think most of us do. I hate to say it, I really miss business networking meetings. Probably the only person on the planet who ever says that. We have another question from Esmeralda Persephone Jones, who says that she's a big advocate of professional supervision, but she's finding it hard to engage with the process remotely. And especially now that she spends so much of her working day online. What can I do to help reignite a positive approach to supervision that's both sustainable and beneficial?
Okay, not a big question at all then. I feel your pain, most definitely. It's a real overload of online, and so I get that after a day online, the last thing you want to do is a 2-hour group supervision. How can you reignite it? Can you reframe it mentally for yourself? Can you think, okay, this is in the short term, it's not great, but I'll get something out of it? Could you look at shifting to one-to-one? I don't always think group supervision is great online anyway. So it may be you could all recontract with your supervisor and have one-to-one sessions. That might be feel more sense of connection. Can your supervisor suggest different ways of working? Can she give you tasks to focus on within the session? Could she put you in pairs to work on something, breakout rooms, anything to break up that sort of just all four of you or however many of you staring at a screen? That might be worth having that conversation with your supervisor.
A couple from me now. I've got a chance to get a word in edgeways. You and I are both practitioner researchers. Could you explain a bit about any research that's been done on supervision of interpreters and what that tells us about how we might have to adjust it or adapt it for the needs of interpreters?
There's not much out there. I've already referenced Ali Hetherington, a couple of papers there. So a group of us are looking to write a paper at the moment, an article about that on that very topic. So we've started trawling, but there isn't a great deal out there. I think I'm aware that Robin Dean runs a form of supervision based on demand control schema. But I don't think that's the same as professional supervision. So for us as interpreters, it's very new. It's in its infancy.
And we've got a question here from Naomi Byrne who says, as a supervisee, what would your top tips be for preparing for supervision so that you get the most out of each session?
Okay, my top tip is not to open your diary and go, oh, it's supervision tomorrow, which it sometimes feels like. So I would keep a diary, she says, opening a paper one, but appreciate people might keep these things on those newfangled smartphones nowadays. And maybe just form either journal, so write down how you feel after a job, or you could create a really simple, like smiley face, sad face, angry face system. And then when you come to your supervision the night before, look through and think, oh, there's a pattern there, or yeah, I wrote about this, I want to bring this. Your supervisor should give you some tools to do that. There's various different tools we could supply in terms of helping you look at dilemmas, asking you to think about the emotions you felt after a job, that sort of thing. But the biggest thing is actually prepare.
Yeah, preparation is the most important thing. Sarah Glendenning asked, do you think supervision should be raised earlier in our training? As far as I know, a lot of student and trainee interpreters aren't aware of it.
Yeah, that's me on my hobby horse then. I think it should be right in interpreter training. I think it should be taught so that it's not feared, so that right from the start, at the start of their career, interpreters know that it's not something to be scared of. It's something that's supportive and something to be enjoyed. And I think it would be really good if people who are teaching interpreters, some of I know a lot of those are practitioners, so they're still working in the interpreting field. They should be modeling it. They should be saying, in my supervision, I talked about this. Because that's a perfect example of why, experienced interpreters need supervision. So trainees get it right from the start.
And Elaine asks, who pays the professional supervisor? Is this a voluntary job?
I wish. No, like all, whether you're paying for a massage or any service, sometimes it's the individual who pays. Sometimes if you work for an agency, they may agree to pay your supervision. Generally, fees are somewhere around £45 to £50 an hour.
It's quite a common fee I've seen for a lot of related occupations. And Alison Gifford would like to know, how do you start getting together a group for supervision? Do you do the supervisor first or the group first?
I would go for the group first because you'll have some feel of who you want to work with. Do you feel comfortable having this person in your group? Do you all have similar working practices? Do you have very dissimilar working practices, and will that work well within the group? Then identify your supervisor, and your supervisor should do some group work with you in terms of establishing ground rules, doing the whole forming, norming, storming and performing work that goes on with groups.
That's a really good question. I mean, it leads on to a question that I had, which sounds like an obvious one, but I think is hopefully more complicated than I think it is. In your opinion, why don't more interpreters get supervision? Is it purely financial, or is there something else going on?
I think it's a combination. I think it's not seen as valuable. I think there's a fear that they're going to be judged or that they'll be doing something wrong. They'll be criticised. So I think it's a combination. But if we're talking about £40 or £50 every 6 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks, depending on how often you decide to engage in supervision, and then you think that you're paying £3 4 or 5 times a week for a cappuccino or a latte, then actually, if it's keeping you healthy and it keeps you sustained and gives you an outlet for what we accumulate, then I think it's worth it. But I would say that.
I do like that thing of an outlet for what we accumulate. There's so much in interpreting that could be described that says that we have a need for that. And can I just say, I know most of the people watching this are sign language interpreters. I think that spoken language interpreters need to be looking at this as well. Jules and I believe, were talking last year, probably during a project, about the myth that there's a type of interpreter who doesn't need help.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as an interpreter who doesn't need any help. So, Amy Jenkins asked, could you explain a bit about individual versus group supervision and the pros and cons of both?
Okay. So one-to-one supervision obviously is just time for you. Group supervision, I've always known group supervision. So I've never had one-to-one supervision for my interpreting practice. Group supervision, obviously it's different dynamics. The supervisor should encourage other people. So if you explain a dilemma, supervisor might make some comments on it, and they might say, what do other people in the group think of Amy's decision in this case? So you're not just getting input from your supervisor, you're almost being co-supervised by other people in the group. that's why I think it's important that you feel comfortable with the people in your group, because you need to feel you can disclose things, and you're open to discussion.
That's really good. I mean, it's interesting to have a setup where you have someone who's an expert, but who's leading other people to grow in their practice together. I wonder if in interpreting we don't give enough time to positive and helpful peer feedback. I don't know, isn't something normal in sign language interpreting that you'll have peers commenting on each other's practice? Because certainly in spoken language conference interpreting, that's almost but not quite a taboo, unless you've really badly messed up.
Okay, I think sign language interpreters do comment on other people's practice, not always in a positive way. Part of the group process is that you almost learn to supervise each other, and encourage each other in a positive way. So you can give feedback. You're not afraid of challenging your colleague, but you're doing that in a safe environment. So, yeah, I've even forgotten the question now.
That's okay. Maureen would like to know, is there a list on NRCPD or somewhere else of supervisors, and what would the approximate cost be for a group?
I think the cost would depend on the individual supervisor. So it's slightly cheaper if there's a group of you. I could give you the example. So my individual one-to-one supervisions are £45 an hour, and for a group I would charge £30 an hour per person.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yep. And is there a list somewhere of professional supervisors that people can go and find one?
Yes, I think the NRCPD now allows people to put down, I think, she says, whether you're a supervisor. Definitely on the ASLE website, people can put if they have supervision as another skill. Just to reiterate that we are not NRCPD supervisors, so most of us don't. Some people have dual roles. They're a professional supervisor and they're a NRCPD supervisor. Bags of room for confusion. We've tried to address that, but we've not been able to get NRCPD to shift, unfortunately, on that.
Change doesn't always come easy. So I've just said in the chat, I'm just conscious of the time, and I'm also conscious that YouTube imposes a very brief delay between us saying something and actually going into the video. It's a latency thing, it's a technology thing. So we have time for maybe one or two questions. Paul Michaels just said people might want to have a look at labyrinth supervision as well. They can Google that. We have time for, I think, about one, maybe two questions. I would say two short ones, but I know when I say two short questions to interpreters don't know what short means in my experience.
We just need to be aware of LV is interpreting solo as well.
So this is why I was trying to keep it very, very tight. And Suzanne Carey is asking a question that we've touched on earlier, which is, how are supervision groups formed?
I think it's like-minded individuals. So if a group of you think, oh, we really want to have supervision, we'd like to do that as a group, that's when you have some discussion around when you might want it, where you would like it, and who do you want to supervise your group. Those things I talked about earlier. Do you want somebody who's completely external, psychotherapist, other professional supervisor from outside of sign language interpreting, or do you have somebody in mind that you want to supervise your group?
Some really good feedback here on places that people can go to find a supervisor from people like Alison Hetherington. And Paul Terp1, I think I might know who that is talking about the importance of having trusted colleagues. Now, I think that it's only fair that we give Elvira a break, so I am going to now move on to just closing this down to give Elvira a bit of space. She's done incredibly well interpreting, and as an interpreter myself, I'm of the opinion that the hardest people in the whole world to interpret are fellow interpreters. It's a bit easier when it's not your language combination, but it's never ever easy. We've got people saying thank you already, so thank you, Jules and Elvira. Thank you to everyone who watched and contributed so much. The guest for next month's interview will be announced shortly. That's still being fixed. In fact, I'm currently fixing the next two. If you would like to keep up with what's going on in the channel, I have just put my Twitter handle in the feed. If you also want to send me an email for me to send you updates, I'm just going to briefly, then you can drop me a message. If you don't have Twitter, I will find a way, because if I put my email in the feed, that won't work very well. Right, okay, I tell you what, let's do this one. Okay, so I have just put a special email address in the chat box. If you want details on upcoming sessions by email rather than by Twitter, please drop me an email at that email address. Please do remember to subscribe to this channel if you enjoyed the video, and the Patreon link, the sponsorship link, is up top as well. The video will be available for playback within the next week once YouTube has finished processing it and I have finished adding subtitles. So once again, thank you Jules and Elvira. Thank you to everyone who watched, and see